Absolutely. And just a question for David. David, I know you wanted to chip in there. I'll let you finish your thoughts on there. But there's a particular question that I want to ask you. So there's a very interesting point about South Africa having been proactive in its adoption of the Twin Peaks regulatory model. I actually had an interesting conversation with the commissioner of the FSCA, Mr. Onati Kamlana, and he was telling me exactly that, in South Africa, we did not really experience the subprime derivative crisis. Like, obviously, we had a few companies like Old Mutual that were invested in some of those, junk securities that were sold, but we did not really experience a financial crisis of the size and scale that would justify a move toward a Twin Peaks regulatory model. And so I think you're right in saying that it was a proactive move from the National Treasury to have adopted this. But you also seem to have pointed at regulation or the lack thereof as having been at least one of the issues that's contributing to this financial illiteracy that we're seeing permeate our society. I'm not sure that that's the case, hey? Well, perhaps it is, but I'm not sure it's as big a problem as perhaps you seem to suggest that it was in the speaking term that you just had now, for the following reason. We've had regulations for a very long time. Now, obviously, they've changed recently, but they've been there for quite a while. And we've had a lot of consumer education programs that, at least in speech, sought to educate the public. But if, as you mentioned, that there were changes in 1994 already, or in 2022, but it doesn't seem to me that there's much that has changed. So the reason I asked the question about blame is, it seems to me that maybe there's something that we're doing wrong. Perhaps it's time that we stop, maybe stand back a little bit and maybe ask ourselves, what is it that we have done to maybe contribute to the problem? Because we aren't seeing, an improvement. It could be maybe a lag effect. I don't know. David, what do you think?
So I think, again, it's difficult to say who to blame.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the blame on human nature. And I think human nature, and this is again where behavioral finance is such an interesting field to look at and things. And it's not something that is new. I think it's in the 17th century. There's a French philosopher called Diderot, and there's this whole thing about the Diderot effect. And he wrote a poem, and it was an ode to my red velvet dressing gown. And essentially what happened is, one of his friends gave him this gift of this red velvet dressing gown, and he put on this dressing gown and he sat down in his chair and he started looking around his office. And what he realized is he had this fancy red dressing gown that no longer matched his office. So he started looking at the chair he was sitting in, which was shabby and old and things. So he went out and he bought a new chair. And then sitting in his new chair, he looked at his desk, which was shabby and old and not matching that. So he went and bought a new desk. So the long and short of that story is that based on one thing, a red velvet dressing, he actually landed up in debtor's jail because he went into this total, I've got to match my whole life to this red dressing gown. And, he was pining for his old serviceable shabby dressing gown that kept him warm and did the thing. And if we expound that from the 1700s now, what do we have now? We've got something like social media. Okay, and we have people posting all kinds of things on social media. I believe people even go to the Golden Mile in Sandton where all fancy brands are, and they take photographs of the Louis Vuitton bands to put on their Instas and create this illusion that this is what success looks like. And as soon as we have that, we're now just compounding the effect, because what does everyone do? They look at it and they go, well, success is me having a 50,000 Rand bag that I can put around my arm. That's not what success is. So we need to deal with human nature. And I believe the way to deal with that is through financial education and allowing people to have, exactly as you said, Phila, do I have the information? Do I have the stuff necessary and the truth that is necessary? But yes, we've also got a financial services industry that in all kind of trust parameters come down very low in a trust viewpoint. So we need to change the consumer's perception of the financial services industry. And we can only do that by not asking people to trust us, but to show that we are trustworthy. So it's a very different concept of saying, trust me, or demonstrating that I'm trustworthy. And this is again where there are really good financial advisors, there are really good financial planners out there who do the right thing, who look after their clients, but they are tarred with the same brush of people who call themselves financial advisors or not. Now, on the regulation side, and this is a very interesting thing about regulation, I've always held the view that regulation is rarely put in place and is there for the people who don't require regulation. Okay, and let me explain it. So I'm naturally a good guy. I naturally will do the right thing and follow the law. So whether the regulation is in place or not doesn't really matter, because I'm already doing what the regulation is asking me to do. But if I'm a bad person, I'm going to look at the regulation and I'm going to go, how do I comply with the regulation but still do the wrong thing? And I think when we talk about a compliance-driven, rules-based regulatory environment, which we've had over the last 20 years, people have managed to sort of put stuff in place that go around the rules, but still make them look good. I think where we're going with principle-based regulation, it's going to be very difficult to hide doing the wrong thing. So this is why I'm excited about how the rules and the regulatory universe is changing from a financial services sector. But then the last point is a lot of these scams and frauds and schemes are perpetrated by people who are outside of the sector, who are not in the regulatory net. You know, quite often we've had a Ponzi scheme reported to us, and it was very difficult to find the right regulator to actually deal with it because the regulatory rules were so defined. Nobody could actually deal with it. And I think what's exciting for me in the regulations, we've got what's colloquially referred to as a duck clause. So if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's going to be regulated by a duck.
Charles Phila.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's really excited about the future that we can do. But the last point is that we should not, as consumers, rely on the regulations and the facts. We should rely on saying that it is part of my obligation, and this is where the FBI financial education philosophy came from. It was first, educate yourself. Okay, so go find information, whether you attend a workshop, whether you look at a credible website or source of information like the FBI Let's Plan website, like a CSIS, Smart About Money, Personal Finance, you know, in the Star, and that they've been writing, Bruce Cameron and his team in the past, they've written a lot of credible information. Maya on Money, there's a lot of credible sources out there. So follow the credible sources, but understand that it does get to a point where financial matters, and I'm not talking about products, but financial lives are very complicated. You know, when you start throwing in, oh, well, I want to do these investments and I'm going to use tax-free investments as an example, came out, and everyone was like, oh, this is great, I can save on a lot of tax. But a lot of people then start using them incorrectly because they are in a position where tax-free savings account is not actually delivering the tax effects that they think they're getting. So it does become very complex. So it does come to a point where you say, I'm at a point where I've got enough education to at least hold my own, but this is now where I need to find a guide. And this is where a financial planner comes in to help guide me further.